So like Stefan said, I will now take an ethical approach on these subject matters of publishing or disseminating potentially dangerous research results. And I would like to start off by just giving a very broad definition of bioethics. And it is that it can be defined as the study and formulation of the ethics and healthcare, of the ethics of healthcare and the life sciences. And of course today what we're focusing on is the life sciences. And the bird flu research is an excellent example of a dual-use dilemma. And this means that, like Julio said, it has the potential to do both beneficial work, but also it risks being used in a harmful way to inflict harm on people. And of course, despite this very obvious ethical dilemma that is the dual-use dilemma, it has not been very explored in the field of... It has not been explored in the field of bioethics as much, because bioethics and particularly research ethics has focused mainly on how to ethically conduct research, rather than the ethics of producing, disseminating, or communicating scientific research. So this is a very new and, I think, emerging field. And some like to call it dual-use bioethics, but this is just the beginning of this research. The bird flu publications raise a number of values that are at stake. Particularly from the scientific point of view, there are core and traditional scientific values that are challenged. And those are scientific freedom, openness, and rights to do research and to publish it. And of course, these problems occur when you're not being able to publish, because no one can reproduce your results. And as a researcher yourself, you need or want the reputation also by publishing, because then you may get more funding and you can do more research. So it's obviously problematic, and it's important values to protect. And Ron Fauchier, like Mikkel said, one of the leading researchers in one of the bird flu manuscripts, has said that we have to communicate, and we do so via publication, and that is the bottom line of this. However, these values are not the only values at stake, and they are therefore not absolute values. Other important values from a security perspective are also at stake, and that is to protect humans, but also plants, animals, and the environments from for instance, biological weapons and the harmful misuses of research. And these are these values are clashing, and this is what is the dual-use dilemma. So there are two main principles in bioethics that can be discussed here, and that is one principle that you have an obligation to do good, but you also have an obligation to do no harm. And these two principles don't always match, especially not in the case of dual use. Like I said, your intention may be good, you want to do beneficial work, but your research may also impose harm on people. So in a definition to do no harm, it's not only an internal moral obligation that is connected to doing direct harm, but it's also imposing risks of harm on humans. And you have, as a scientist, a general moral duty to do no harm, and therefore you also have a duty to prevent harm from occurring. And in my view, constraints or compromises of scientific values are legitimate when doing harm supersedes your obligation to do good. And of course, this assessment is extremely difficult to make, and this is what the whole debate has been about concerning the bird flu research. Because you have on the one side scientists saying that this is beneficial, and then you have the security experts saying that this could potentially be harmful. And the question is, which one weighs the most, which one is the most important? And it becomes a question of also who has the burden of proof. And usually this burden is put upon the security community to say that there is a real threat, that there is definitely going to be harm if this is published, and that constraints will not hamper research that much. But you could also flip it around and ask the scientific community the same thing. Will constraints definitely hamper research, or seriously hamper research? And also, do their research, will it not impose harm on people? And in my view, I don't think it's very fruitful to talk about who has the burden of proof. I think it's about realizing that we have a shared burden of proof, that all parties in this discussion should come together and provide the information that they have to get a good decision, because that's the most important thing, not who has the burden of proof, because really we don't know because of the uncertainty surrounding this. We can't say definitely what the benefits are going to be for the future, and we cannot say that will definitely not be used for harmful purposes and cause harm. I have a quote here that I think is quite provocative and interesting to discuss, and that is that we have to get away from the ethos that knowledge is good, knowledge should be publicly available, that information will liberate us, information will kill us in the techno-terrorist age. And this is from a bioethicist named Arthur Caplan. And I think it raises two important points. One is that there is a real fear of bioterrorism, of misuses of research. And whether this is a real fear or not is, I think, not perhaps the most important thing to discuss. But post 9/11 and post anthrax letters, this is the security climate we live in, and this is sort of what we have to deal with. The other point I want to make is that I think it's dangerous to look at knowledge as intrinsically good, or that it has a value in and of itself, despite the uses it may have, because I think it reduces scientists to being mere producers of knowledge without having any responsibility for the consequences it causes. And I don't think there is any group in the society that can kind of isolate itself and say that you're doing things, but you're not going to take responsibility for the outcomes of what you're doing. Now I'll go on to give you 3 examples of objections to constraints on the dissemination of scientific knowledge. And the first one I have here is, it's quite often heard, even though in other words perhaps, but the main thinking behind it is that if I don't publish, someone else will. And of course this is, in my view, a very problematic statement, and it's not compatible with responsible research conduct. Because generally you can't justify your own irresponsible behavior by referring to the potential future irresponsible behavior by someone else. And I think this is one of the very bad arguments against constraints that sometimes occur. Another one is that the public needs to know. And I put in brackets and with a question mark, do they really need to know it all? And like Mikael was talking a little bit about, what they wanted to do with these publications that we are discussing is that they wanted to omit some of the material and methods from the papers. And of course, from a scientific point of view, it can become quite absurd to not include methodology, because you need to be able to reproduce it. And of course, this is what validates your science. If you don't say how you did it, you can't validate it. But one possible way of constraining research is to omit certain information and only give that information to the people who, in quote, need to know. And of course, as Mikael also was telling, we don't have any system for doing this. So this becomes very difficult. We also need then someone or an authority who decides who needs to know and decides who needs to know. And this could be quite complicated, and there is no solution as of today on how this would be done. But I think it may potentially be an option in these cases, and one way of constraining. Another way of constraining research dissemination is by considering where and how you disseminate your results. There is another case that occurred in 2001 where there's always been debate about the dual-use concerns, and that is the mousepox experiments that were published in Science. And later on they were published in New Scientist, a more popular press journal, with the title "Disaster in the Making: An Engineered Mouse Virus Leads Us One Step Away from the Ultimate Bioweapon." And of course, from my perspective, this science seems quite irresponsible to publish this with this title. Even though everyone agreed that it's okay to publish it in Science, taking it this step and publishing it in the popular press with this title is, in my view, quite irresponsible. So it goes back to considering also where and how you publish or disseminate results. Another objection against the constraints is that they will hamper scientific research. And the answer is probably yes, it will hamper it. But then again, maybe rightfully so. Like I said about being responsible for preventing harm from occurring, if the outcome of the research is predicted to be so harmful and detrimental to humanity, then we really can't go back once we've provided that information. So maybe sometimes it is right to put a hold on research. And this doesn't have to be a definite hold. It could be like in this case, you put a brake on things and you practice precaution and restraint, meaning that it becomes a temporary constraint that slows the process down. And maybe it does hamper research, and maybe it doesn't, and maybe it hampers in the short run, but not in the long run. But I think that's one way of looking at constraints, as a temporary thing that provide time for reflection and discussion, and to get a more informed decision making on these issues. So I'd like to think of constraints in a more positive sense. And I don't use the word censorship because I think, at least in my mind, it sounds quite negative. And if you choose to look at constraints more positively, I think they may be temporary and partial, and therefore also provide time for reflection. I think they also could stimulate to interdisciplinary communication, like what happened in this case. The scientists, 39 of them, came together and decided we're not going to do research on these viruses for 60 days. We're going to take a pause. And during that time, I know at least one meeting with the World Health Organization between science editors, security experts, scientists, and ethicists that took place, and to discuss these publications. And of course, the goal would then be to produce more well-informed decisions. And the Nature article has been published. And so the decision was finally to make both these manuscripts available. Even though the one that was supposed to be published in Science hasn't been published yet. But the one in Nature is out there. So to conclude and answer my first question of should science be censored, I think in some cases, under certain circumstances, I think it may be an option to constrain dissemination, and that it is occasionally justifiable and reasonable to do this. And I think this process also shows us that there is a call for international guidelines and international discussions on how to move forward, because this is the first time it's ever happened that you haven't been able to publish your results. It's the first time ever, and I'm not sure it's going to be the last time, so there might be a good time to start thinking about these things. And like Julia also said, awareness and education on dual use in the life sciences is important, because it is at a very last stage that you decide not to get things published. These decisions should probably be made at the funding stage, where if you're not going to do a type of research, it's you could look at constraining research before publication as a last step or as a very late step. And of course, from my point of view, I think more bioethical analysis on the ethics of dissemination of dangerous dual-use knowledge is needed. This field is quite unexplored. So, thank you.